with a much purer heart and a clearer vision of who their God was, and a deeper commitment to live what God had asked them to live. I'm not sure if anybody sees any parallels to Trinidad. They might just be incidental, I don't know. But out of suffering, we emerge better. And out of challenge, we emerge stronger and clearer, with far more insight, if we do the spiritual work that God asks of us. I believe that in this post or pre or whatever COVID time you want to call this one, I'm not even sure myself, because it's gone, but it's still here. There is a work that we have to do of grieving, because so many people have lost so much over the last 3 years. And a lot of what we see in our society is really trauma that is being played out in our schools as we saw the upsurge of violence. Trauma played out in our streets as we've seen the upsurge of violence. Trauma played out in our families as families have had to be face to face. And sometimes with no reprieve because we couldn't move. And the trauma that we are experiencing as a nation is something that we have to consciously understand and consciously work to heal. Because when people have been traumatized, the reaction is usually anger first. And after anger, all kinds of other things after. And if you listen to the pulse of the nation, you hear that anger. It's boiling. And why is it boiling? Because we've experienced this collective trauma, and now we have to find a way to say, okay, it was terrible in some ways. In other ways, it brought us some things that we didn't have before. I mean, when in Trinidad and Tobago, did we have as many times of prayer and days of coming together of all the religions as we have had during this COVID time? When else did we see our leaders speaking to us on a weekly basis and helping us to make sense of what was going on? There's so many things that we have to rejoice about. Our reading speaks about the desert becoming not a wasteland, but a fertile land. And it speaks also about it rejoicing and the dry land exulting. That the opposites happen if we understand how to do the spiritual work. And what is the spiritual work? It is a work that we are all called to do. We have made a national pastime of disrespect. Am I wrong? I'm not hearing you. Am I wrong? We've made a national pastime of disrespect. And the first spiritual work that we must do is recognize that every human being is a child of God. Regardless of their creed, of their race, of their station in life, of where they come from or where they didn't come from, they are a child of God and therefore deserve the dignity of a child of God. And as long as we continue with the culture of disrespect, we feed the trauma and we feed the spiral that we all experience. And to move to a culture of respect is to recognize that every citizen of this beloved and beautiful nation has a spiritual work to do. We have to hear the way our tongue engages other people. And we have to start with restraint in holding our tongue and giving a word of blessing where we used to give a word of curse and a word of disrespect. The second thing that the passage pulls up for us is the compassion when God comes. The eyes of the blind will be open and the deaf will hear, and all the people on the margins of society will experience a grace of healing from this God. And this is the second work that we all can do. The work of compassion. The work of compassion. We used to be a really compassionate people. Huh? And I think we still are in so many ways. And compassion is one of the fruits of being with God. And that's in all of our religions. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you is a universal ethical norm that crosses every people, every religion, every tribe, every country. And that at its heart is compassion. You know, our grandmothers used to cut dumpling and share with people when we didn't have enough for ourselves. And they always took care of somebody else when they didn't have what they needed. And our grandparents understood what it was to be compassionate, because today is you, tomorrow it might be me. And we lived as a community that shared so deeply with one another. And those values of yesteryear need to be our values again today. And then the eyes of the blind will be open, and then the deaf will hear, and the lame will leap. Because compassion is one of the spiritual movements when we come into the presence of our God. And that too is across all religions. The move to compassion is opposing what we see on the streets of our city, which is a kind of hard-heartedness, a kind of a bringing people down and a tearing people down for foolish and silly reasons, and a hardness in the way we relate with one another. And the third of the things that pop out from the reading to me is gratitude. And then they will come to Zion shouting with joy. Everlasting joy on their faces. Joy and gladness will be with them. Gratitude is the first impulse when we've encountered God. It always is. The first thing you want to say is, I can't believe how lucky I am that God has blessed me with such greater favor. I can't believe it. And that impulse is so unconscious. It comes from every place inside of us. And the opposite is true. When we have moved away from God, we go to ingratitude. And you all know what the old people used to say about ingratitude? It's worse than witchcraft. And I think we're becoming a people of ingratitude, where no matter what we give is never enough. An entitlement. And everybody need more and want more, and nobody is satisfied with what we have. And that's a spiritual work, because that's a spiritual problem. And it needs a spiritual diagnosis. That the soul of our nation is in need of a spiritual renewal in every one of our traditions. We have to be able to speak to our people. We have so much to be thankful for in this sweet and beloved TNT in which we live. I don't know about you, but I really wouldn't want to live in Ukraine right now. Not me. And there are plenty countries in the world. Don't ask me to go and not go in there to live. There's so much that we have about us. But if we understand that the difficulties that we've been through in the last few years, the challenges that we are facing, the ways in which we as a society have helped each other. I've heard stories from people who didn't know where their next meal was coming from. I'm talking about people who've never asked for anything in their life, and who were able, by a friend helping them, or their church helping them, or this one or that one, were able to make it through the most difficult time that they have faced in their adult life. And all they have is gratitude for the way in which they were able to make it through this difficult time. And that's the gratitude that I hear from our people on the ground in this country. And that's the gratitude I want to hear our whole nation sing with. If we become a people who respect one another, and a people of compassion, and a people of gratitude, we'll do our spiritual work together. And you know, then we could all gather and say, may every creed and race find an equal place. And may God bless our nation.